Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our special live coverage between LabPadre and Spaceflight Now of SpaceX's Starship Flight 8. This eighth suborbital test flight of the fully integrated Starship rocket, targeting a liftoff from SpaceX's Starbase facilities in southern Texas with a 60-minute launch window that opens up this afternoon at 5:30 Central, 6:30 Eastern, 23:30 UTC. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. Whether you're joining us from over on the LabPadre side of the coin or Spaceflight Now, we are very happy to have you joining us for our joint live coverage today. Whichever stream you happen to be on, be sure to help us out a little bit. You can do so by just clicking the like button, sharing the stream, allow some more folks to cruise on into this live coverage as we are currently counting down towards the planned liftoff here in just under 2 hours from now. Taking a look out in the wide view from South Padre Island, though, weather is far from optimal, so sorry to say for the folks that have traveled down from various parts of the country or parts of the world to be here for this launch. If you are north of the pad and you're looking south at it, you may not have the best view for liftoff, but we'll do our level best to bring you views like this from closer up to the rocket than would be safe for any human to venture. And we'll, of course, be tracking liftoff for as long as we can until it's obstructed by the clouds that are hanging around. As you take a look at the bottom of your screen, you can see some of the milestones that have elapsed so far. We had a road closure about 10:50 Central Time this morning. The pad was cleared about 1:30 this afternoon. And since then, SpaceX has been preparing the ground systems to begin tanking this Starship and Super Heavy booster. As mentioned at the top of the broadcast, of course, weather will remain a watch item with this mission. So conditions remain breezy down at Starbase. If they have not begun tanking the rocket, and if they do, in fact, need to stand down from a launch attempt today, they would have presumably a backup opportunity tomorrow, assuming there's no technical issues with the rocket. As we're cruising on through the count, if you have a comment or a question or just want to offer a little bit of support, whether you're watching through Spaceflight Now or the LabPadre side, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Be sure to get your questions in. We'll try to answer them as best we can throughout the countdown. If you type the @ symbol followed by the word question and then write out your question, it'll populate into our question system. And that way we'll get alerted when new queries come in. And again, we will address them as best we can as we cruise on through the countdown today. In just a couple of minutes, we'll go ahead and step through the countdown timeline for the mission, let you know what the fueling milestones are. Broadly speaking, though, we're about 30 minutes away from the point at which the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of propellant load for today's flight. And actually, let's go ahead and tick that box now so we can get everyone caught up to speed with today's operations. following the go-ahead being given for the start of prop load. Start here with the liquid oxygen beginning to flow on board the ship upper stage. Starts about T-minus 45 minutes, 59 seconds. Largely, this will be pretty similar to the Flight 7 fueling sequence for those of you who were with us for that coverage. Things have been tweaked just by a couple seconds here, a couple seconds there, but for the most part, there aren't broad sweeping changes to the fueling timeline. LOX load will be followed by liquid methane loading on the ship upper stage. Starts at T-minus 42 minutes, 59 seconds. Then it's the booster's turn, the super heavy booster, tail number B15 flying today. We'll see that liquid methane flow start at T-minus 41 minutes and 22 seconds, followed by liquid oxygen at T-minus 35 minutes and 35 seconds. The Raptor engine chill down for both the ship and the booster happens simultaneously on this rocket. Starts about T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. Moving right along, ship prop load wraps up at T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds, followed 30 seconds after by booster prop load. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch 30 seconds out. The flame deflector will be activated 10 seconds. Raptor engine ignition is at T-minus 3 seconds, and as SpaceX likes to say, when we hit T0, excitement is guaranteed. Another thing we can guarantee for you is an education-filled show, lots of facts and figures and all the information you'd ever want to know about Starship and Starbase, and who better to bring on board for this part of the conversation than our friend Mr. Zach Golden of CSI Starbase fame. Zach, it's good to have you back on the stream. How are you, sir?
Excited for Flight 8. It's going to be a really awesome day. I think we're going to be relying a lot on onboard views today, but still, as you said, excitement guaranteed.
Yeah, it's not exactly what you'd call a Chamber of Commerce kind of a day as far as the visuals that we'll probably have from the ground, but yeah, we'll do our best, and like you said, rely on the SpaceX onboard cameras. Unfortunately, the ship has been outfitted with the Starlink internet service, which has been pretty darn reliable throughout the course of these past few flights. So, barring some issue with Starlink, we should have pretty good views following liftoff as well. For those who are not familiar with Zach Golden's work, you can find him right here on YouTube just by searching CSI Starbase. And Zach, I'm not going to ask you to fully summarize two nearly hour-long videos each into about a 10-minute conversation. But, you know, the most recent things that you've been working on, the most recent investigation videos that you put out have really been focused at the heart of the operations here, you know, the pre-launch setting, the orbital launch mount, and the ground systems. You know, if you could sort of, as much as you want to go into detail, but you know, what have been sort of your high level, maybe I'll phrase it that way, your high level takeaways from the latest updates that have been made to the launch tower and the orbital launch mount? Is, you know, Tower 2 obviously is still, you know, and coming up.
Yeah, of course. You know, back in around Flight 4, SpaceX actually announced that they were building the second launch pad, and since then we've been keeping our eyes to see all of the differences that we can see with Pad B. And I guess one of the most obvious ones would be the completely redesigned launch mount. So I think a lot of people initially were kind of confused why they made such a dramatic change with the launch mount. The largest of which being that it's now square and also sitting on top of a flame trench instead of 16.5 meters above a flat surface. So a lot of major design changes have been made with that new launch pad. So one of the things that I've kind of set out to do over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 months was kind of explain why a lot of these changes would be necessary. Because, you know, SpaceX, occasionally they will give us some information behind that. You know, more often than not, it comes during the Everyday Astronauts tours of Starbase with Elon, and we'll also get some tidbits here and there during the actual launch webcasts. But in general, they're not going to really go into a ton of detail about all of the issues that they've been having with their launch system because, as this episode kind of shows, that would take quite a long time to get through all of that information. So that was basically what I did over the last two episodes that I released. It's actually a three-part series. We're basically covering all of the repairs and refurbishment required to just get the launch mount back up to operational status in between flights. So, not the most exciting topic, but in my opinion, a very important one, especially with, as I said, just such a dramatic change coming to the second launch pad. I felt it was a good idea to kind of give people a summary of some of the stuff they've seen in between launches. I know a lot of people don't really pay as close attention as some others, but still may have seen different events shown in like the daily or weekly updates from NASA spaceflight and others. And kind of taking all that information that you see sporadically and putting it all together to tell one story was the goal, so people get larger a larger overview of what issues they've had with this current launch system. Obviously they've been successful enough with it to reach 8 flights in I think it's what, almost 2 years now. But their goal is to dramatically increase their launch cadence right now. So, some of their limitations with doing that is vehicle readiness. We've seen that leading up to this flight even. I think the original launch date was supposed to be this past Friday, and I think some readiness issues with ship 34 kind of got in the way and forced them to push that out a little bit. Occasionally you also see delays with just getting launch licenses and various approvals, and other times there's delays due to work on the actual launch pad. So whether that's upgrading the chopsticks or the tank farm or making repairs to the launch mount, it's all a big if you're a project manager, you'd have to look at all of these delays in multiple lines to actually see what's the biggest delay that they have, or the weakest link in that chain. So in that episode, I really wanted to just focus on the launch system because I don't think it gets talked about enough. Usually a lot of people are really just here for the actual launches and they don't really get enough information about behind the scenes. So, try to fill in that information gap for a lot of people. So, yeah, if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. Got part 3 coming soon, where we'll actually talk about the known differences of that second launch pad, which I believe we'll see become operational before the end of this year. If I had to guess, probably end of summer. It's coming along very quickly right now, so exciting times.
Exciting times indeed. Currently now T minus 1 hour, 39 minutes, 52 seconds and counting. Want to tug on just one of the threads that you mentioned as you give a great sort of overview of the 3-part series. In the pursuit of decreasing the amount of time it takes to get from one mission to another, obviously part of that is going to come through optimizing their propellant system and the tank farms. And you mentioned apologies, forget if it was part 1 or part 2, but SpaceX's eventual move towards having an air separation system so that they can generate their own liquid oxygen. For those who are not following it quite as closely, can you just go into a little bit of detail as to why that's important as opposed to their current method of needing to truck in all of their the LOX as well as the liquid methane?
Yeah, of course. I wish I had perfect numbers for this. I have somebody in my Discord server who tracks this pretty closely. Her name is Vix. I'm assuming she may be in the chat right now, although I haven't seen her yet. But yeah, in between each launch, and if they end up doing wet dress rehearsals, you end up seeing hundreds of deliveries of cryogenic propellants. So that'll be liquid oxygen, liquid nitrogen, and liquid methane. In total, I think it's somewhere around somewhere between 150 and 170 tanker truck offloads that they receive for each launch. I think it actually may be higher than that if they have to do a wet dress rehearsal, and that also I don't think factors in the static fire tests. But really, a tremendous amount of specifically liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen that they go through. And that is one of the things that they're trying to solve. So, with the changes that they've made to the actual tank farm, I'm sure many of you, if you tuned in way back during the first 3 to 4 launches, you will remember seeing the vertical tanks that were in the background, which obviously now have been removed and replaced with horizontal storage tanks. And I think at this point they have enough capacity to store. We're guessing about 2.5 flights worth of propellants. So that's quite a lot of material. And when you consider that the booster and ship hold about like 5,300 tons of propellant, so multiply that by 2, and then you also got to factor in the liquid nitrogen that gets used during that process. So, you know, I want to say probably close to 15,000 tons, somewhere around that, of propellants that they're storing on site. So you can just imagine the amount of traffic it requires to bring that much propellant. I think I want to say just from the industry I work in, they would probably be limited to 40,000 pounds of propellant that they can bring in each load. You all can go ahead and convert that into tons with like 2 ton, or sorry, yeah, I'm not going to do that math right now. Going to get myself sidetracked if I go into that. But yeah, tremendous amount of propellant. And, while they're in their current stage of things where they're only doing a launch every 1.5 months, it's okay to rely on that truck traffic. You have plenty of time. They usually get started pretty much within 12 hours after this launch. You'll see all of them lined up. But plenty of time to do that. But once you're shrinking your launch times down to within a week or days of each other, then that kind of becomes a nightmare as far as traffic goes. You would have just a very large logistical nightmare going on there. So the biggest place where they're able to reduce that is with liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen. So that's why they're planning to incorporate an air separation plant into Starbase operations. I believe they're also constructing one at the 39A complex in Florida. And, as I said, liquid nitrogen, liquid oxygen, they'll be able to produce that on site. I think part of that process is liquefying both of them. So it's basically, a facility where you produce those two commodities. There's also some argon involved in there, but I'm not sure if they really have a use for that other than with their Starlink satellites and small amounts of usage with different welding operations that go on. But those are your two that you care about most is liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen. So they'll basically be able to produce it 24/7 and just transfer it over into their large holding tanks. But part of that, because it has to run 24/7, they have to actually reach a point where their usage matches the production. So you'll kind of get an idea of when they plan on truly ramping up their launch cadence once they actually start that, because that'll be a big sign of, hey, we need this right now, because you don't want to just a facility like that is not something you want to turn on and off all the time. So the fact that they are planning to construct that is a big sign of what to expect in the future as far as launch cadence from Starbase.
Yeah, and just having the storage capacity to facilitate that 24-hour production, obviously seeing signs of that spinning up will be a good indication that they're starting to really pivot in that direction. Was just thinking as you were talking of the sheer volume that's currently being trucked in and offloading that, if you will, to an on-site production. I mean, just thinking about some of the knock-on benefits of that, not only being able to move things around faster, but also, for the wear and tear that does on the road, uh, State Road 4 that goes to and from Boca Chica Beach. Obviously, when you have that many trucks moving that often, it'll put more wear on the roads faster. So, not
I
maybe
actually
the top of mind thing that folks think about, but yeah, go ahead.
I actually do have some numbers I can put behind it. I just noticed Vix tag me in the chat. So the numbers, and she keeps track of these very closely. So this is just since the last static fire of booster 15. They've received 175 liquid nitrogen, 133 liquid oxygen, and 24 loads of methane just since the last static fire. Um,
Wow.
and that methane number is going to be a little bit lower because they only use a very small amount during static fire tests. So what you would actually need for a full launch load would be significantly higher than that. If I had to guess, probably at least around 100, if not slightly more. So pretty insane amount of traffic.
Yeah, no kidding. Same amount of traffic and same amount that'll be saved once those are no longer needed to be clogging up the roadways. Just a little point in time here, T minus 1 hour, 32 minutes, 25 seconds from the opening of, or excuse me, from T0 here. In just about 15 minutes, the SpaceX launch director should be making their call on the start of prop load for today. Zach, I know obviously we've been talking a lot about the infrastructure behind the launches that really make it possible, but if we could pivot for a second, talk about the actual rocket itself. One of the things that, folks may have read as SpaceX published as they have now typically done in between their launches, talking about the upgrades and the changes from one version of Starship to the next. Musk mentioned on Ask Elon Musk, that is, of course, saying, "quote literally about 100 experiments running simultaneously on the heat shield, which is part of why it looks so patchy." End quote. You just talk about as you've been watching the iteration on the heat shield, your thoughts of obviously we didn't see it really put to use during Flight 7 since it had the mid-flight anomaly that caused it to break up over the Turks and Caicos Islands. But from the other flights that we've seen of the performance of the heat shield, kind of your impressions of how SpaceX has been iterating on that part of the mission.
Yeah, of course. Near the start, flight 1 and 2, there was a lot of shedding of heat tiles during the ascent phase. Pretty large amounts of heat tiles falling off the ship that, resulted in people being able to find them on the beach for months after. But it seems like since then they've improved their adhesion. So some of the tiles that used to be pins, they started gluing them on certain zones where I think maybe they had some issue with just the larger tiles and the flexing of the actual vehicle. They switched to smaller tiles, which I think probably improved the performance as far as like the vehicle flexing goes. But over the last, sorry, flights 4, 5, and 6, we did see really awesome reentry footage of the ship, which even though they did have some significant problems with burn through around the flaps, it still allowed them to actually perform a water landing on those flights. So, they do have a lot of room to improve, but the fact that those early versions were actually able to even survive long enough to attempt those landings is a good sign. Right now, they've reached the point where they are, as you said, performing a ton of tests with those tiles, and that includes a lot of different things. So, for one, there are a ton of missing tiles currently, and under each of those tiles, they have basically a thermal blanket, which I think covers most of the surface area of the back of the ship. So basically, that's intended if they lose tiles during the ascent phase or on reentry, they want to know that this sheet that they have is a good enough backup to allow them to still reenter without the ship burning up in the process. So I think, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head, they did mention how many tiles were missing on the last flight, and I think it's pretty much identical here. And that's actually really interesting that they've gone ahead and removed so many of them because this is a balance of things you're trying to test. Number one, you want to be able to prove that the ship is able to survive with the loss of tiles in certain areas, but you also want to actually land the ship and be able to recover it because, their big goal coming up is going to be the first return to launch site catch of the ship, just as they do with the booster. So, in order to do that, they're going to want to have as much information as possible. And part of having as much information as possible is actually being able to recover the ship. So, that means once it lands, or well, first it needs to land in the Indian Ocean, and then it also needs to survive tipping over. So that is their big hope for today. And in order to, I guess you want to balance those two goals. So you don't want to intentionally have it burn up by um, having missing tiles, but you also want to prove that it can survive with those tiles missing. So I think that's a good sign of their confidence, the fact that they're even doing this intentionally, given that their main one of their main goals is to actually be able to recover at this time. So beyond those missing tiles, they also have a few other experiments that they've mentioned, which are I think metallic tiles, which I believe some folks have identified the locations of those. They did kind of show them a little bit during the stream during Flight 7, but I wasn't sure if they were actually showing the true locations of those tiles because it seemed like they were just kind of circling random areas. But beyond the metallic tiles, they also have actively cooled tiles, which that in itself is very interesting. I wish they would give us a little more information on how that actually works. But yeah, as far as we know, those are the main experiments. Obviously, Elon said there's what do you say, over 100 of them. It would be awesome to get a full list of everything they're doing there. But beyond that, also with the version 2 ship, the forward flaps are a little bit further back. So they're kind of tucked away from where the plasma stream will be in a way. And hopefully that will allow them to be a lot more robust during reentry and won't see as much issues as far as burn through goes on the actual flap mounting points. So that's basically what they're hoping for most today is that this improvement goes a long way into improving the performance on those forward flaps. And I hope that's the case too, because if not, if they kind of have the same issue, then that presents a lot of problems as far as how to proceed from here in order to improve that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a lot better with this configuration of flaps than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, obviously we never got a chance to see, the forward flaps put through their paces with Flight 7 having its early demise. So definitely looking forward to seeing that, performance as well as, how well the heat shield tiles that are around the, granted they're not meant to be load bearing with this version of them, but the catch fittings that are on the ship upper stage, how well those heat shield tiles perform, since you want to obviously have some assurance once it comes back and you're trying for catch at the ship upper stage of the tower that they have made it back through peak heating without loss of structural integrity. Um, Given that this is the first time they're actually going to get data back on that, Zach, um, a little bit of a crystal ball question, but do you think one flight would be enough to garner enough information and confidence, specifically in that regard, to attempt a ship catch the next go around? I know obviously there's been some filing in with the Federal Communications uh, Commission, the FCC here in the United States, suggesting that Flight 9 could potentially feature a ship catch. But, do you think more testing might be needed beyond just this one flight since Flight 7 didn't yield, obviously, what they had hoped?
Um, well, I feel just off the top of my head that it's that they may want to do it twice. But a lot of people also said that after Flight 4 with the booster that, oh, they should probably do this again a few times before they attempt this to actually return it to the launch site. So I guess I should keep the same mind state that I did back then, which is, you know, if they feel like they're ready, then they're ready. I think the big questions are going to be how the um, the catch points are going to hold up. So right now they do have simulated catch points on there, and it's basically just catch hardware. The actual hook that lands on the landing rail is bolted to the side of the vehicle, so it's not a it's not an operational catch pin. So on the next ship, which would be ship 35, they do have integrated catch points on those on that ship, which is actually a structural pin which attaches to the I would say the forward dome, but I think it's a little too high up for that. So there's some sort of structural setup inside of the nose cone area that the catch pins are attached to, which actually allows it to bear a load. Which right now, if you were to try and land on the chopsticks with the current catch pins, they would probably just shear off. So, one of the things that they're going to want to make sure today is if they're able to actually recover the ship, they will probably want to remove those catch pins. That'll probably be one of the very first things that they do is remove those catch pins and return them so they can, do some analysis on how they're holding up, how the structural integrity or how much ablation occurs on the actual pin, just so they have that information. Right now, they're already doing structural testing for with a test article of the ship to make sure that it's able to survive the actual catch attempt. So a little bit different than the booster. The ship comes in with less pressure in the tanks, which makes it more easy to collapse it by squeezing on the outside of it. So they've done some tests at their test facility at the Massey's site, which basically involves compressing the sides of the tank with a simulated landing rail. So on both sides, they put that on both sides of the ship and then pull those together to kind of like just squeeze it and make sure that it holds up and doesn't collapse as they're doing that. So very similar to what they did with the booster, ensuring that the structural integrity is going to be enough to survive that catch. So that is another part of the equation. And that's I think probably the easiest part. It's kind of rare for them to fail those structural qualification tests, although it does happen. So in my opinion, the biggest thing is going to be whether or not the catch pins are melted to the point where it would interfere with the ship landing on the landing rail. I don't think the anything related to the tiles or the flaps will be enough to prevent them from trying that. Although I think if the flaps ended up like they did on was it Flight 4 when they were really badly burned through, if it happens like that again, I think they probably would maybe want to fix that issue before making that landing attempt, even though they have pulled it off several times already. I think just to reduce the overall risk, that may be something that stops them from making that attempt on Flight 9. But I think the biggest thing that they're going to be looking out for is the condition of those catch pins after touchdown.
Well, that's a good prognosis of the play of things that we'll see coming up here. And this, folks, is why we have Zach Golden on, since he's so in tune with everything going on at Starbase. It's wonderful to chat before a launch and in the midst of flight and, really get into the weeds about all the things that have been going on and the things that are upcoming and really be able to parse things out with what's coming down the road. Speaking of coming down the road, we're T minus 1 hour, 19 minutes, 6 seconds and counting from the planned liftoff of this Starship rocket you're seeing there live. Do have some questions coming in as well. This coming from Patricia Griffin, asking if you can give a brief description of what we will see once it begins. So go ahead and bring up, actually, we've got the mission animation from Flight 7, which fortunately for our purposes is basically, from a visual standpoint, a wash, rinse, repeat of a lot of the objectives that they were going for. Following the liftoff of the vehicle and separation of the ship upper stage from the super heavy booster, which you'll see here in just a moment here. You got that stage separation. The booster will perform a boost back burn, and around this time, they will make the call on whether or not everything is in place for a booster catch, like you see there in the animation, or if they need to do an offshore diversion and have the booster land in the Gulf. Meanwhile, there will be a deployment demonstration of some dummy Starlink satellites. They will perform an engine relight test of one of the Raptors on orbit. Obviously, as we've been talking about, those heat shield tiles will be tested through peak entry. Vehicle will target a splashdown in the Indian Ocean, perform a flip maneuver, as you see here, and attempt a soft water landing down there in the Indian Ocean, a little bit northwest of Australia, as you can see here on the global map. This ties in with another question that we got from Glenville Goggerly, asking why SpaceX chosen a late afternoon launch. Is this due to landing burn time in the Indian Ocean? The answer to that broadly is yes, that given that they've been able to prove through a number of these launches that, with the exception of Flight 7, that the ship is able to make it through to the point of surviving peak heating and conduct soft water landings there in the Indian Ocean. They will once again more than likely have some marine assets in place in order to gather as much data as they can at the point of splashdown. Obviously, they have and can do this at nighttime, but the visuals are much better and they can gather more of that type of data under daylight conditions. Now, currently T-minus 1 hour, 16 minutes, 14 seconds, and counting. When we went through the countdown timeline, we obviously went through the process of fueling. I have a question from Colonel, who asks if there is any reason for the specific order in which things are loaded. Zach, I'll bring you back in here to talk about this one, since the order of fueling hasn't changed and now for a couple of missions, but there was a period, those first few flights certainly, where they were changing up the order of, if they're starting with the booster versus the ship, and whether it's starting with liquid oxygen versus liquid methane. As you've watched the refining of this fueling process, I guess, what's been your biggest takeaway of how and why they've landed on the current method that they've got right now?
Um, well, that's a little tough, especially with, I think now they load the ship. They start a few minutes earlier with the ship. Um, it's always been a bit confusing to me because the, it, you would think that they would go with the booster first, considering the ship has a few minutes longer before it actually starts its engines up during flight. So you would think that if you want both tanks to be at the same temperature during an ignition, that you would hold off on loading the ship at least 2 minutes and something seconds after the booster. But it seems like they actually start with the ship first. I think part of that may be due to the actual propellant loading capacity that they have for both the ship and booster. So, just looking at liquid oxygen, there are 5 pumps that they use to load liquid oxygen onto the ship and booster. 3 of those are dedicated for the booster, and 1 is dedicated for the ship. There is a 4th one that is basically able to switch back and forth between the booster and ship, so they can either use 3 and 2 or 4 and 1. So that kind of determines their loading speed. But I think in general, with having more pumps on the booster side, they're able to load propellant way faster on the booster. So it kind of makes sense to start with the ship first. That is going to be a little bit different in the future. Right now, they have a lot more pumps that they're going to be using once the new tank farm comes online. Excuse me. So you can actually see just in front of us, right below the booster, there's those 2 things sticking up, kind of blocking the view of the launch mount. Those are actually liquid oxygen pumps that are for the tank farm extension. Those are dedicated to pad B. So right now there are currently 4 of those, and is space for about five more. So we're thinking that they're going to have nine liquid oxygen pumps this time instead of five. So that will change things up. Right now, we're not really sure what the how they're going to divide that up. It kind of seems like they'll have four pumps for the ship and five for the booster instead of two and three. So that's going to dramatically increase the or decrease the propellant loading time. We're thinking right now it's about 45 minutes. Back in flight one and two, it was 90 minutes. So they basically cut that in half. And based on just the increase in the amount of pumps they have, we're estimating that they could bring it down to about 30 minutes, if not slightly below that, once the new launch pad comes online. So that is a pretty insane. I think we'll see the order of operations for propellant loading change based on that. Now that they'll just have way more capacity, it's going to get pretty interesting. I think it's already feels fast right now. What is you might know better than I off the top of your head, the propellant loading times for Falcon 9? Is it 35 minutes?
It is 35 minutes. That's when they start with RP1 and locks.
Yeah, so this will even exceed that. So 30 minutes for um, at least 10 times, if not more, the amount of propellant is pretty insane. But that's something they feel is necessary in order to achieve the performance that they want. To keep their propellants as cold as possible, they need to also load them as quickly as possible. So 90 minutes down to 30 here in the near future is a massive increase of performance right there. So it's going to be exciting to. I kind of hope they get into in the future explaining the difference that makes with the actual performance of the Raptors. I know in Eric Berger's book, where he covers the same topic for Falcon 9, he actually is able to go into that a little bit. And I think Alien Space did an interview with one of the GSE engineers for the Falcon program. So he talked about that a lot too. So it's something that is big on their mind, increasing the performance by simply keeping the propellant temperatures as low as possible. So that paired with the new Raptor 3s, once those finally make their way onto the vehicles, going to see some very large performance increases from both the ship and booster. But yeah, the propellant stuff is going to be, it's definitely for the nerds. I do think there's a lot of people out there who are really interested in it. So hopefully I can kind of get into it in more depth on a later date. But yeah, there's a very, very large project going on to increase the performance of their tank farm right now.
Well, you say that's for the nerds, but I think that's probably why most of us are here, right? Is because we all are space nerds of some form or shade. And we all got this big affinity for rockets and space exploration. And obviously, the Starship program is uh, metaphorically and literally a very big part of all of that. Currently, T minus 1 hour, 9 minutes, 47 seconds, and counting. At this point in time, assuming a launch at the opening of the window, the SpaceX launch director should have made the call on the start of propellant load. At this point, no official update from SpaceX, that will keep our eyes peeled for that. SpaceX does have an hour-long window for this mission, so it does have a little wiggle room as far as the start of things here.
Yeah, it does feel like it might be slightly delayed if that's their planned time. Because I haven't seen maybe I missed it as I was talking, but I haven't seen the tower vent start at all yet. So they are doing the pre-chill sequence for the actual tank farm, but then they go into the pre-chill sequence for the both the launch mount and the tower. And I haven't seen the tower at all yet. I'm not sure if the launch mount has gone yet either. It's a little bit difficult to see from this angle, but I'm pretty sure they have not reached that point on either side.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain there's not been a tower vent, and I also don't believe we've seen one at the base of the OLM either. this may also be, as SpaceX is getting more into a rhythm with its Starship missions, possibly, would not be the most ideal for those of us covering the program, but may be falling more into a pattern of what we've now grown accustomed to seeing with their Falcon 9 launches, especially where it's concerning Starlink, where SpaceX doesn't make any kind of statement until they are right up to the point of preparing for their own broadcast to start. Sometimes with a customer mission, they'll announce the start of fueling or that they've given the go ahead for prop load to begin. Actually, if we can go back to the Rocket Ranch camera view, Zach, it does look like we're just barely starting to see, if this is correct, a little bit of venting.
Yeah, so the vertical one coming up at the bottom left of the screen, I believe that one is the recondenser for the methane. So that is used at different times. So it's actually one of the ones that's constantly going. Always different amounts of venting coming out of it, but usually they use it for. Oh, we got some, I think, tower venting right now, just starting to. So yeah, that vent usually means they're either conditioning the storage tanks. So as that propellant is just sitting in those tanks for long periods of time, it starts to warm up a little bit, and they actually have to, take that boiled off gas and turn it back into a liquid in order to maintain the proper tank pressure. So you'll see it if you'd have to be on site to see it because it's nearly um, uh, invisible when they're just doing regular tank maintenance. But when they are doing pre-launch, that involves chilling down all of the propellant lines, both going to the tower and to the launch mount. So they'll actually start pushing methane through there, and it'll start boiling off pretty much immediately because the pipes are I don't want to call it room temperature, but they're warm in comparison to what the cryogenic temperatures of the liquid methane is. So it starts to boil off pretty much immediately, and then they have to send that all the way back to the tank farm and run that inside of a heat exchanger with liquid nitrogen to basically turn that gaseous methane back into a liquid and send it back to the storage tanks. So that is what you're seeing with that vent that's coming straight up over there on the bottom left. And they'll also do a similar process for the liquid oxygen. However, they don't return it to the tank farm because it's not a greenhouse gas. I think that's the main reason. There's no reason to recover it because it's cheaper to just order more of it instead of chill it back down. So you'll also see them doing that same process, pushing liquid oxygen. There's actually some debate whether it's liquid oxygen or nitrogen for the chill down process, but from what I've seen, I'm pretty sure it's liquid oxygen. They'll actually push that through the lines all the way to the launch mount, all the way up to the top of the tower, and they'll actually have to vent off the excess gas that's being vaporized in the process. So right now we are seeing that come out of the tower. It's a very small stream relative to what we'll see here in a few minutes. Once the liquid starts to transition from gas to liquid up at near that vent, you'll start seeing much larger stream of gas coming out of there. And same thing on the launch mount. I believe we do have some venting coming out of the launch mount right now. So it looks like both parts of the launch pad are in that pre-chill sequence now.
Based off the fact that we're just now really starting to see that tower vent, does that suggest in your mind that they may be pushing a little bit further into the window as opposed to starting right up the jump?
You know, I do have a tracker that kind of goes into the timing. I don't have it present right now, so I'm not sure off the top of my head when the start of pre-chill venting, what the usual time is for propellant load. I can probably try and pull that up in the background here and see if I can find it though.
Yeah, while you look for that, let me go back to our question portal, see what folks are talking about here. Obviously, with the SpaceX and Starship program keenly focused on both lunar exploration, but long-term Mars exploration. Got a question from Martin J asking when the next Mars windows open. Believe the next best opportunity would be near the end of 2026, somewhere in the fall time frame. Question from MD Jim asking, would SpaceX scrub the launch today purely to visibility issues? More than likely not. Typically, a scrub would come from either a technical issue, either on the rocket or a ground system, or if there's a weather violation for, say, using some terms from here at the Kennedy Space Center and the Cape, but for things like the cumulus cloud rule or the thick cloud layers rule, principally what you're trying to protect against with a rocket launch is the rocket generating its own lightning or flying through any type of storm that would have an electrical field within it, or the rocket creating the possibility for charging those clouds as it makes its ascent if conditions are right. Similar risk could be posed if you have an anvil cloud as well in the vicinity of the pad. But as far as visibility causing a scrub, no, that would just disappoint some folks that are in the area of Starbase hoping to see the launch for themselves, but more than likely SpaceX would not stand down from just a lack of visibility. Thanks for the question. Now currently T-minus 1 hour, 1 minute and counting. Again, SpaceX has not at this point issued any type of update or statement saying that they have adjusted their T0 at this point in time. So unless or until we get a firm note that the launch time has been adjusted, we'll continue to proceed as though they are targeting a liftoff at the beginning of the window. Again, we are monitoring various inputs and we will update our clock if needed. We're just about 15 minutes away now from the start of LOX load on the ship upper stage. Again, that's assuming that SpaceX is targeting the opening of the window. Its first launch opportunity coming up here. Now T-minus 1 hour and counting. And since we are at the 1 hour out mark, I'll do just a bit of a soft refresh for those of you who may just be joining. You're watching live coverage of the Starship Flight 7 mission from SpaceX's Starbase facilities in southern Texas. I'm Will Robinson-Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. Appreciate all of you who are joining on either the LabPadre or Spaceflight Now live streams. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor, whichever stream you happen to be watching through, click that like button, share the stream with your friends, your family, all the strangers. Allow some folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we are cruising on through the count. If you'd like to help support what we do with these live launch opportunities, a great way to do that, beyond becoming a channel member for either of our channels, or both. Both is good too. You can use the YouTube Super Chat feature, and not only will that help us to elevate your comments, queries, or just kind words, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now and LabPadre, and that, my friends, is always greatly appreciated. That's a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question as well, you can use the @ symbol, write the word question, and then write out your question. And that'll populate into our question queue. And we'll also be keeping track of those as well. It's our pleasure, of course, to be joined on this live stream for those who may just be popping in and uh, are not familiar with our guest today. We are fortunate to be joined by our friend Zach Golden of CSI Starbase fame, channel right here on YouTube, which you should also subscribe to, where they do deep dive investigations and explainers on various upgrades, updates, and things coming down the road here at Starbase, both on the infrastructure side as well as on the vehicle itself. So if you really want to dive headlong into the weeds, it's a great place to do that. But of course, we're fortunate that Zach is here right now and able to answer some questions and be with us as we're tracking this launch coming up here in less than an hour.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be starting to lose some visibility here from the launch pad camera once this pre-chill really enters its uh, deeper phases, and then we'll get a brief break from that once they start propellant loading, and then we'll lose it again. Those subcoolers that they use for the propellant loading process push out quite a lot of venting nitrogen gas. So yeah, we're gonna lose a little bit of it as always. I really like the aerial views that they showed during the propellant loading process because it kind of looks like just a lake of clouds. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but really awesome the way the launch site looks during propellant loading.
You can paint the word picture however you want, Zach. I think Lake of Clouds is perfectly fine. Obviously, we've been talking about a lot of the future updates that are coming down the road here for Starship and Starbase, but we haven't really done a lot of conversing about what we saw with Starship Flight 7. Since you and I haven't really had a chance to talk about this one specifically, as we're playing some video from SpaceX from that mission. I wonder, maybe the obvious notwithstanding, or if you want to expound upon the ship issues, what some of the big takeaways were for you from Flight 7, and what's been top of mind for you since we saw this launch?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that was probably worth talking about as far as Flight 7 goes was obviously the explosion of the ship. I think a lot of us assumed we were past that point of seeing something like that happen. Um, but they did make some major changes to version 2 of the ship, which last flight was the first flight of a version 2 ship. I just sent a little diagram here to Lucid in the background, so maybe we might be able to pull that up. That might help out with some things. But they made a very large change to the propulsion system of the ship, which basically changed all of the engine plumbing. So this is definitely going to be better to have a diagram to explain. But essentially, they instead of having one large transfer pipe going from the methane tank down to the engines, they now have four of them. So one that splits off for each of the center engines, and then individual ones for each of the vacuum engines. And so basically by increasing the amount of complication in that system, or having, instead of one large pipe for all six engines, having four smaller pipes, I think that kind of led to an issue where they ended up having some sort of vibration in the actual engine plumbing, which caused, I believe they said, an explosion with one engine. And then 2 minutes later, they had another one. And they ended up having fires inside of the actual engine skirt. And that kind of led to the early shutdown of, I think, all but one of the engines. So after that, they lost communication with the vehicle, and the automatic flight termination system was triggered. So they basically kind of pinpointed that issue down to that engine plumbing. They didn't explicitly say engine plumbing, but based on what we know as the largest changes, that's probably what was going on. And now we have a little graphic up here that kind of shows that for us. You can see that old ship design on the left side, and this is thanks to the ring watchers for producing this diagram right here. I think Jack's worked on this for quite a while and put out a very large article explaining all of the differences between the version 1 and version 2 ships. But yeah, so you can see one on the left has that one large pipe going down that splits off at the bottom, versus the new design has one in the center for those center engines, and then there's three outside of that. One of them's kind of overlapping, so it's you're only seeing two of them. But yeah, you can see those are smaller pipes, and basically just introduces more failure points. So basically, with vibration of those engines, when you're up to higher throttle levels, um, things can start to fall apart in those conditions. So with the latest ship, which is the one launching today, Ship 34, they kind of did some more stress testing on that to make sure that the engine they weren't going to see the same issue that they saw last time. Um, they didn't really go into detail as far as what changes they made, but I'm assuming, based on past events, that they probably added some extra reinforcement somewhere to prevent the same issue from happening again. That's pretty standard for what they usually go through. They kind of go with the minimal that they think is going to work, and until they notice an issue with it, they just continue with that, and then um, add reinforcement as necessary based on results from testing. So in order to test that this time, they actually performed a 60-second static fire test with Ship 34. And that was quite the spectacle, I would say. We did get a little bit of a heads up on that from Shayna Diaz. She kind of tweeted out that we were going to see something a little bit different. And putting two and two together based on some other information, we were kind of on the lookout for a larger static fire test. And it definitely did not disappoint. So a full 60-second static fire test, which I think the longest we've ever seen from a ship is um, probably around 14 seconds. I could be off a few seconds plus or minus on that. Yeah, over here on the screen we have LabPadre's footage from that static fire test. And, this is something that was previously just not able to be done on their initial test stands that they had at the launch site. So moving that testing over to Massey's, putting it on a flame trench with a very large amount of water on hand, they're able to perform these longer tests, which is a major benefit. I'm actually kind of surprised that they didn't start doing this sooner. Um, you know, with Falcon 9, and you may be able to correct me on this, I'm pretty sure with every new Falcon 9 booster, they perform full duration static fire tests. I'm not sure exactly how long they go, but they're certainly longer than 15 seconds, which is the previous longest we had ever seen with a ship. So, 4 times longer. A lot of changes in throttle during this test as well too. So sometimes certain issues, especially when it comes to sound related issues, vibrations, sometimes it takes time for those to like develop. So instead of performing a super short test where you're maybe at different throttle levels for a few seconds at a time, if that, you're actually able to do sustained testing at certain throttle levels, which what they did here, they actually, I'm assuming, started at, lower startup throttle, whatever that is, and then increase that, and holding those different throttle levels for certain periods of time in order to try and simulate the conditions that led to the previous incident. So everything seemed to go fine after this. There was some weird popping that happened after engine shutdown, but given that Ship 34 is out here for today's launch, I think everything must have turned out all right with that. They did take it back to the production site and do some final outfitting on it for a few weeks. But yeah, this was February 11th, so about 2 weeks. But everything seems to be fine, and hopefully, what they learned during this testing makes them a little bit more confident that they won't experience the same issue this time around.
Fingers crossed on that side. Want to make a quick note here, as we're currently T minus 48 minutes, 30 seconds to the opening of the window and the first possible launch opportunity. If things are on track, fueling is set to begin here in less than 3 minutes at T minus 45 minutes and 59 seconds. However, just looking at some possible indicators on where we are, NASA's Gulfstream aerospace plane noticed took off just after 3 o'clock Central Time from Houston, made its way down to the, just offshore in the Gulf. It has since made a couple of loops and returned back to Houston for a landing at about 4:26 p.m. Central, 5:26 p.m. Eastern. Typically, the Gulf Stream has been used to help with some of the imaging of Starship flights, since obviously future versions of this rocket will be used as part of NASA's human landing system, and the on-orbit propelling tests are going to be part of tanking the HLS version of Starship used on the Artemis 3 and 4 missions. Artemis 3 currently set for no earlier than 2027 at this point.
Speaking about that, I don't know if you've seen it, but I did hear that they actually pushed their expected timeout for when they plan to test on-orbit propellant transfer. I think they pushed it out to 2026.
I have heard some of that. I know there was a comment from Elon Musk on X sort of alluding to that. Let's see if I've got that here. Yeah, his quote, and I'll quote him here, is full and immediate reflight of Starship along with orbital refilling probably happens next year. And we had spoken with the Human Landing System office at the end of last year. They'd mentioned that at that point, the on orbit tanking test campaign was expected to begin somewhere around mid 2025. So we're working to get some confirmation from the NASA side of the equation on what the timeline is for that testing, if it has in fact slipped entirely into 2026, or if there are just some updated plans that they can provide. Obviously, we'll let folks know as we learn. Currently now T minus 45 minutes, 28 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX should be in LOX load, again, assuming they are targeting the opening of the window.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they've started that yet.
Yeah, given
Still,
the amount of vapor in the air, it's a little bit hard to tell, but now we've got sort of a clear pocket of visibility on the ship upper stage, and may take a minute or two beyond initial LOX load. I know it, at least for a Falcon 9 rocket. Actually, do have an update from SpaceX. Team is go for prop load, targeting 5:45 p.m. Central for the launch. So we've got a launch slip to 15 minutes past the opening of the window. So we're going to adjust our clock here in a moment to reflect that. And as you can see, our countdown clock has been updated to reflect the new T0 time. Now currently at T minus 58 minutes, 53 seconds and counting, which, Zach, I'm guessing better aligns with the timing that we've been seeing with the couple of chill vents prior to really getting things moving here.
yeah, looking at this Rocket Ranch view, you can still see that venting on the bottom of the launch mount. It looks like the tower's kind of tapering off a little bit, so that may be a sign of the ship starting soon.
Yeah, if they're now launching in 58 minutes and some change, we should be about 12, 13 minutes away from LOX load beginning. So that would make sense.
Yeah, seems like not as much venting as normal from the tower, so that's a bit odd.
As we're just approaching the point of prop load, this question seems very apt. Zach, I'll toss this one to you. This comes from Kevin Springer, who asks, why are cryogenic storage areas referred to as farms?
Um, that's a good question. I would say that maybe a farm isn't the best to call it yet. Like once they have this new air separation plant and are actually producing their own liquid oxygen and nitrogen on site, I would say it probably deserves that farm name a little bit more. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's a tough question to answer.
Fair enough, since obviously they're not farming or mining anything quite yet. It's more of a maybe it's a tank barn, really, at this point. I'll point this in your direction as well, since you've got a pretty good grasp on sort of the future flow of things. This coming with a 5 pound sterling super chat from the Spaceflight Now stream, asking, with how fast the Starship program is moving and innovating, where do you see the program in 5 years, 10, 25? Keep up the great coverage. Thanks to KTL Rob Powell for both your membership and the super chat. Very much appreciated.
Um, 5 years. 25 years, I would say, is a little bit hard to predict. I think they got some big challenges ahead of them that will shape what that future looks like. Ideally, I guess in the next 5 years, they definitely want to have completed a multiple missions to Mars. So I think, as you mentioned, that's 2026 and 2028, where they would have their next opportunity after that. So I think they would like to get human certified by 2028. I kind of have my doubts on whether or not they'll actually be able to pull that off because there's just a lot of development that needs to happen before then. So not only do you need the reentry capabilities solved on the ship, I think there's also some questions about, you know, the general feasibility of it, as far as the atmosphere on Mars being a lot different than ours and requiring more aero braking than what they're able to get on Earth. So, you know, I feel like there's a lot of questions that need to be answered in that regard. But, you know, in 2026, I believe they should be able to pull off getting multiple missions to Mars. I think that would just, you know, with having three, two launch pads by then, hopefully, when assuming that the 39A pad may be completed by that time. So, you know, multiple back-to-back launches, um, potentially even launching months in advance if they have the ability to remain in orbit that long. Um, you know, that would require them to actually develop solar panels and all that stuff for the ships. But you know, there's lots of potential for them to send, you know, more than just a handful of ships to Mars at the same time. Try several different missions with them, different entry profiles, different, you know, just getting one in orbit or something like that. So, you know, I guess the success or failure of those determines what happens in the 2 years following that. But yeah, very difficult to predict where they will be in 20 years from now. But looking just using Falcon 9 as a reference, I would say that, you know, there's no reason to doubt that they will accomplish their goals because pretty much everything they've set out to do with the Falcon program, they've been able to do. Other than, I think they initially did want to achieve full reusability, and they kind of gave up on that with the second stage. But other than that little piece right there, I think they've pretty much accomplished everything they've wanted to with the Falcon program. So fully expect them to do that again here. And I'm it's tough to say and just change the subjects here a little bit. Tough to say whether or not they've started propellant loading on the ship or not. Um, but I believe okay, the launch mount is still going.
Yeah, I know if they're on schedule for liftoff at 5:45 Central, ship loading won't start for another about 7 minutes. So making headway, certainly.
What's your opinion on where you think they'll be?
Oh gosh. Um, Crystal ball questions are always fun. I suppose over the next 5 years, obviously we hope, in the front half of that time frame that they'll really start to have a good grasp for, and I don't know if it'll necessarily be for rapid reusability on the booster at minimum, but I think they'll start to build a cadence that is good enough to allow for the on-orbit refilling. Obviously, that's going to be really important for the Artemis program and for sending, you know, cargo eventually to Mars and enabling future crewed exploration of the red planet. So I'll keep my thoughts within the 5 year time frame. I think they'll start to get a rhythm down with on orbit refilling over the next 5 years, and that'll be kind of the biggest highlight. I mean, that's going to be breaking some big ground. That alone, that's no small feat. I think given the infrastructure that we've seen with the Star Factory, that we'll see obviously an increased cadence not only of the Raptor engines, but also hopefully of the the ships and the boosters to enable that rapid time turnaround.
Yeah, that's the crazy part is that they're really only using a small fraction of that factory right now. So um, we've been lucky enough to, for some reason, they're doing it outside instead of inside, but they build all of the turntables and platforms for their workstations inside of the Star Factory. They build them outdoors. So we're actually able to keep track of how many of them they have, essentially. I'm sure there's some that they may be building within the facility instead of outside. But given the never-ending stream of them, it does seem like they're constructing all of them outside. So we know that they're still in the process of that, and that means still most of that factory is probably just empty space right now. So every month or two, they finish another workstation and add that into the building, and that you know further increases their production capabilities even further every time they complete one of them. So yeah, we're going to see things ramp up here. I think it'll probably take them another 6 to 9 months to finish all of that as far as getting all of those workstations online. But once they do, it's going to be crazy to see what becomes the bottleneck at that point. If it's, the launch site, or if it's, waiting on vehicle readiness, or, you know, waiting for additional approval to actually increase. So I think right now they're shooting for 25 launches per year, but that's definitely going to increase. I think initially people thought there would never be more than five uh, per year, which they still have not exceeded that yet, but we do know that they're planning for at least 25 now. And I expect that to just continue to increase year over year, essentially.
Well, and actually, in service of our conversation of the next 5 years of the Starship program, we actually do have a new and pretty extensive update from SpaceX on their Florida-based plans for uh, onboarding Starship and what that'll entail. Just give you some of the highlights from this as we're getting it and having a chance to read it over. As some have been aware, SpaceX obviously has been expanding the footprint and getting permissions and clearances to build more of their Hangar X site here at the Kennedy Space Center. Part of that will be adding type of facility that folks that are familiar with Starbase footprint are familiar with, the Gigabay. One of those is coming to the Hangar X location at the Kennedy Space Center, which SpaceX describes as standing about 380 feet tall with about 46.5 million cubic feet of interior processing space and 815,000 square feet of workspace, which SpaceX says includes ground level, elevated platform work areas, and work and meeting space on the top floor, with the Gigabay being able to support Starship and Super Heavy vehicles up to 81 meters or 266 feet tall, and will provide 24 work cells for integration and refurbishment work, along with cranes capable of lifting up to 400 US tons that are uh, comparable, or I should say, compared to the Mega Bay in Starbase. I'll quote them directly here. Quote, Gigabay provides more than 11 times the square footage for workspace, 19 additional work cells, more than twice the crane lifting capacity. SpaceX goes on to say that the preparations for that Gigabay in Florida are already in work, and they expect to have that new facility operational by the end of next year. And there's also at the same time another Gigabay in the works at Starbase, and similarly, they also expect that to come online by the end of 2026. We're going to be bringing you just a moment here, live view from Launch Complex 39A here in Florida, so we can give you a visual aid as they're working on the Starship tower there. That you can see that it's been in work since 2022 when they began stacking those tower segments. Also, just want to pause and note that we're T minus 45 minutes, 5 seconds, and counting. Lock load is now underway, assuming SpaceX is still on track. Ship fueling is set to begin at T minus 42 minutes and 59 seconds. Going back to Florida for a minute here. SpaceX says in the coming months, they're going to be building and installing the PADS deflector system, similar to what we see here at Starbase. And they say pending completion of environmental reviews, they intend to conduct Starship's first launch from Launch Complex 39A in late 2025. There's some more details to go over here, but Zach, bringing you back in, just threw a lot at you and the audience, lots that in the work here in Florida. Your first reaction to some of those timeline updates that we're getting now from SpaceX?
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I mean, the building that facility at Starbase is going to take quite a while because they do need to um, clear some of the buildings that are currently there. So Stargate, the Stargate building, which was part of their um, engineering building, I believe, a lot of office space in there. They will need to move all of that over to their new office building, and then probably demolish that building, demolish the high bay, and start construction of that. And I think just based on the footprint, it may potentially expand beyond. And we now have a picture right here of what the one in Florida will look like. So this one right here is appears to basically be attached directly to the Star Factory. So that's interesting. They'll basically flow from that building in straight into the Gigabay. I think it's going to be a little bit different at Starbase because, well, I suppose it is possible for them to attach it directly to the factory. However, doing so would the process of doing that would eliminate their main access way for the ships. So I'm not sure if they would be able to actually attach it directly to that building or not. But to achieve opening that before the end of next year, I believe they probably are going to have to start that scrapping those other buildings sooner rather than later. So I think, after each launch, we do see an uptick in some form or another, whether it's the launch site construction, tank farm stuff, or even things at the production site. We always see new things pick up pretty much immediately after a launch. So that'll be one thing to be on the lookout for is for them to actually start that process. Yeah, we've entered that phase where pretty much can't see anything on that launch site camera. Um, I do believe they're probably loading propellant on the ship right now.
Yeah, we're now T minus 41 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. At this point, yeah, we've already gotten underway with ship fuel loading, which started at T minus 42 minutes and 59 seconds. And we're just past the start of booster liquid methane loading, as confirmed by SpaceX as well. The last fueling milestone that is still out ahead of us is coming up here at about T minus 35 minutes and 35 seconds when booster LOX load will begin. We should also be getting pad level views from SpaceX here in the next minute or so. So once those are available, we'll be factoring those in as part of our coverage as well.
Yeah, it appears SpaceX did just go live.
Yep, that's certainly a good sign that things are moving along. Just one last note on future of Starship here in Florida. As those have been tracking the Starship program here in the Sunshine State, not only is SpaceX interested in using Launch Complex 39A for future launches of Starship, but they're also wanting to take a look at Slick 37 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Environmental reviews are underway on both locations right now. SpaceX notes that they've been given what they describe as a limited right of entry for Slick 37, the now former launch site of United Launch Alliance's Delta IV Heavy rockets. At that site, they're conducting what they call their due diligence to move forward with the Environmental Impact Study, or EIS, as led by the Department of the Air Force. Now getting views from a drone operated by SpaceX. We'll continue to check back in as we get some views out around the pad that are a little bit clearer than what we're seeing with our cameras right now. It's a little bit foggy at this point. Now, T minus 38 minutes, 41 seconds, and counting, just a few minutes away now from the start of booster LOX load.
I wish they would show this propellant loading view for the entire webcast because it's really awesome seeing the way all of this venting is happening on the ground level. A little difficult to see when your camera is at the ground level.
Yeah, it would be nice if there was a dedicated clean feed of the full fueling process that we could just tap into. SpaceX notes that they are still tracking towards a 5:45 p.m. Central liftoff. No technical issues are being tracked. Weather green, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Range also green, so there's no vehicles or aircraft that are in range of the rocket in the keep out zone. Just about a minute away from the start of booster LOX load. Now T minus 35 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. At this point, booster LOX load should be in work. And at this stage, now all four tanks on the Starship and Super Heavy have begun tanking. This process will continue from now until about T minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds, at which point ship prop load will wrap up. Booster propellant load concludes at about T minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds before liftoff. Zach, as we're approaching the final 30 minutes of the countdown, one thing that we haven't really talked about at this point in our coverage is one of the mission objectives that SpaceX has on this flight that was unable to be accomplished because of the early demise of Ship 33 last go around, which is the deployment of some dummy Starlink satellites. Now, because this is a suborbital flight, they will not be deployed into orbit. They will follow the same track as the ship upper stage if all goes well. There were 10 on board the ship last time. There are 4 on board this time. Taking a look at some video of the hot staging process. But as far as the payment deployment part of this mission, Zach, how critical is it to actually see SpaceX execute on that this go round in your mind?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be really important. I'm kind of surprised that they haven't done it before now. Obviously, they were kind of on a reduced. I think they would have done it sooner for a various amount of reasons. For one, on their earlier flights, they had issues with the actual structural integrity of the payload bay, so they weren't able to test out anything on those first few flights. They actually ended up welding the payload bay door shut. On the next few launches, they were doing some testing of the actual door. I think that was flight 4 or was flight 3 that they did testing of the payload door. I think that was actually 4. And after the result of that flight, they oh, sorry, that was actually three. The one that ended up tumbling out of control. I get them all mixed up a little bit. But they suffered some delays with that, and they kind of decided to scale back their testing to focus on reentry. And last flight was supposed to be the first time that they were actually going to attempt a dummy payload deployment, and they obviously were not able to do that. So I think being able to do that this time and being able to actually verify a lot of things that they have been wanting to verify for a long time. If the door is going to open properly, if it's going to close properly, and making sure the actual deployment system works as expected. Um, you know, those are all very important so that they can actually begin launching Starlinks on these missions. That is really important. So they're actually, gaining some revenue stream with each of these launches instead of just spending money. So, the sooner they're able to actually begin deploying real Starlinks, the better. And, that'll actually start to make Starship kind of carry its own weight a little bit. And right now, I feel like it's kind of been riding off of the work from Falcon 9 as far as capital expenditures go. So, yeah, I'm really excited for that test today. I think with having four of them on board, we're not sure whether or not they have cameras on them, but we are hoping that we may see some unique views of cameras on the actual payload. I'm wondering how that would work. I guess it just needs a short range antenna from the dummy payload back to the ship in order to transmit to the ground. Um, and they did seem pretty basic as far as mass simulators go. We did watch the install of those dummy Starlinks the other day, and they basically seemed like just basic frames with panels on them that didn't have anywhere near the amount of functionality as or even the same form factor as the real Starlinks. So, uh, wondering if we'll actually see any type of camera on them today.
Yeah, that's certainly something we were wondering about during Flight 7, if we were going to be able to see from the vantage point of the dummy Starlinks. Though I imagine if there are not cameras and there's not a short range antenna like you were uh, theorizing there could be, this test may be more focused on just the mechanics of deployment as opposed to all of the form and functionality of the Starlinks, which we know from various videos that have been shared and images over the years from SpaceX that they do have some onboard imaging capabilities. So I would
Yeah, we'll
be sort of
definitely see the
wonderfully
view.
surprised if we saw that today, but not banking on it.
We'll definitely see the view from the actual payload bay itself, but whether or not they have a view looking back from the Starlinks, that'll be a whole nother question.
Exactly. Now currently T minus 29 minutes, 37 seconds and counting to the planned liftoff. Next milestone coming up here is just a hair under 10 minutes from now when the Raptor engine chill gets underway on both the ship and the booster. As you can see from this camera perspective, prop load on all four tanks is moving along well. See that frost line on the various tanks moving slowly up both the booster and the ship. As we heard a little bit earlier in the broadcast from SpaceX commentators, they're at this point in time working no issues on the vehicle or the pad. Of course, stand by for any further updates should that change, but fingers crossed that they are still moving towards a good liftoff of the fully integrated Starship rocket here in less than 30 minutes. Now's a good time as well, if you haven't already, whether you're watching through the LabPadre stream or Spaceflight Now, if you give whatever stream you're watching on a thumbs up if you like that, allows some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Very much appreciate with both channels. Also, be sure to subscribe to Zach Golden's channel, CSI Starbase, and catch up on their deep dives with everything going on down at Starbase and with the evolution of the Starship program.
Gotta love the way these drone camera views allow you to see some details that you're not able to see otherwise. All the venting occurring on the ship and booster. Um, the frost, different levels of the frost line. Um, just the amount of venting coming from everywhere is pretty incredible every time.
Yeah, and obviously, I imagine you're looking for certain things when you see those types of various camera angles than your average bear, if you will. Zach, when you're seeing some of those different perspectives that you just can't see from the ground level, what are some of the things that you're looking for as we get more visual data on Starship in these moments where we see those flybys? What are you hoping to learn as you see all these different perspectives?
To tell you the truth, nothing much. I mean, with looking at aerial photos pretty much every week, it becomes difficult to start to find new things just from those angles. But it is really cool just being able to see the different processes in action on the booster and ship. I think it would be really cool if they just had a dedicated stream showing that aerial view like that. Um, and I don't think you're necessarily able to learn so much given how much, especially with the ground systems, you have a whole cloud covering all of that up. But uh, just being able to see it in action is really cool.
Also, whether or not this may be an indication of what we'll see during flight, throw all the grains of salt you want onto this, but uh, ex-user Robin was talking about just a little while ago, hoping to see a satellite cam for deployment of the dummy Starlink satellites, which that comment was, you know, for what it's worth, liked by Elon Musk. So read into that what you will, but perhaps there is hope that, assuming SpaceX is able to do a good deployment demonstration, that maybe there are cameras on board and we just might see that on satellite perspective. We'll just have to wait and see. As far as the timing of that, that's coming up in the mission post liftoff. Set to happen at about T plus 17 minutes and 24 seconds. As we're getting close to the planned launch here, I want to go ahead and take a moment to go through the flight test timeline just to give everyone an overview of what we're expecting with a good liftoff of the Starship Super Heavy fully integrated rocket. And we did hear that there is a hold in place. The SpaceX commentators were talking over it, so it's a little bit hard to make out what they're saying. Let's go ahead and listen in for a second.
We heard that an operator hold got in, so they are troubleshooting one issue. As we continue to move through prop load, we'll get some more details on what caused the hold and if we start to reset to a new T0. We are still loading prop on the vehicle, so essentially putting that hold in means that if we get through everything and we hit that T-minus 40-second mark, we'll hold there and wait to clear the issue if we haven't cleared it at some point in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, for those that are unfamiliar, that T-minus 40-second period is an opportunity to troubleshoot, unlike our Falcon timeline. So we do have a little bit of leeway.
Yeah.
Continuing on with...
As you just heard, the hold, unlike a Falcon 9 rocket launch where a hold would elicit a scrub, since SpaceX does not have the ability to halt or alter fueling timeline once propellant has begun on either a Falcon 9 or a Falcon Heavy rocket. There is that margin for a Starship launch that comes up at about the T-minus 40-second mark, where once they hit that pocket, they can extend the countdown to continue working any potential issues. Of course, we'll continue listening in to SpaceX commentary, and if they provide any additional information regarding that hold, especially if there's an updated T0, we'll be sure to jump in with that as well. Currently, they are still counting down towards a liftoff coming up here at 5:45 p.m. Central, 6:45 p.m. Eastern, 23:45 UTC for our friends around the world. As we're getting close to the conclusion of the countdown, though, do want to bring in a new voice, part of the LabPadre team, Nathan Ziegler. If you can hear me, welcome into the show. Glad to have you with us.
Yeah, great to be here. Always exciting to get to watch Starship launch again. And so looking forward to hopefully getting past this hold and moving forward with the launch.
Yeah, and since we haven't, you and I had a chance to talk about all the goings on with this mission, go ahead and bring you in on this point that SpaceX is highlighting right now, some of the updated heat shield tiles and the various experiments, the dozens across the ship upper stage that are being tested as far as having better and ultimately working towards a fully reusable heat shield. Just wanted to get your top level thoughts on, what you're expecting to see with some of these tests and the importance of getting this Block 2 ship through peak heating today.
Well, with them wanting to start catching ships so quickly, I think this is an important test today. And I'm curious to see how the metallic ones handle, especially the ones that are cooled. To how will they handle reentry? There's a lot of different things. I wish we knew more about all the various types of tiles and various materials they're using. But it's the metallic ones, I think, that I'm the most curious about.
Zach, I know we've talked a bit about the tiles as well, but is it the actively cooled ones? I think you were saying were what you were kind of most interested in, if I remember your thoughts on that. Is that kind of the one you're locking into?
Yeah, I was kind of hoping they were going to explain a little bit more about them, but they've kind of just given just a general announcement that they're there. They don't really talk much about how they work. It's really difficult to see any details with that because a lot of that stuff is going to be under the skin. So I do think it's really interesting topic that hopefully in the future we'll get more information.
That view we were just seeing, of course, was loading of the dummy Starlinks. This is a rendering of what an operational Starship would look like on orbit, deploying those version 3 Starlink satellites. The flight to date is, of course, going to follow a suborbital trajectory. Starship is not going into orbit and will not be deploying its dummy Starlink satellites into orbit. They will follow the path of the ship upper stage and splash down in the Indian Ocean if all goes well. Excuse me, they will burn up, not splash down. Now currently T-minus 17 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. At this point, the Raptor engine chill is getting underway. Actually, this is a really nice view. This is SpaceX explaining the deployment of their mobile remote cameras that are deployed in the Indian Ocean that capture views like the one we saw here with Flight 6 of the splashdown of the ship upper stage in the Indian Ocean. So we should be getting some good views of that on this flight, again, assuming that ship survives better than it did last time. SpaceX commentator Chris Gebhardt noting that there are about 30 cameras on Starship rocket today. So assuming all moves along well, we should get some pretty nice views throughout the course of the flight. See how many of those camera views SpaceX decides to loop into the broadcast. Currently T-minus 15 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Let's go back to that flight test timeline since we were interrupted with the update from SpaceX when we were just about to get into the flow of this here. Following liftoff, about 2 seconds post T0, the rocket will pass through max Q, or the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle, a little more than a minute into the flight. Then we'll see the booster MECO, which on a Falcon 9 would be main engine cutoff. For a Starship booster, that is most engines cut off. That'll be followed by the release of the hot stage, or the hot staging point, which is stage separation, where the Raptor engines on the ship upper stage will ignite and the ship upper stage will separate from the booster. Super Heavy booster B-15 will perform the start of its boost back burn. That starts at about T plus 2 minutes and 45 seconds, lasting until about T plus 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The hot stage ring will then be jettisoned a couple seconds after that. And if all goes well during that process, then SpaceX will make the call on whether they will attempt a catch of the Super Heavy booster with the tower and the chopsticks, or if they need to divert the booster for a landing in the Gulf. If a catch attempt is made, the booster landing burn start will happen in about T plus 6 minutes and 37 seconds, with the landing burn shutdown and catch attempt just before the 7-minute mark. Moving on to the objectives that they were not able to accomplish during Flight 7. T plus 8 minutes and 44 seconds, the engines on the ship upper stage will shut down. We'll see the 4 dummy Starlinks be deployed at T plus 17 minutes and 24 seconds, followed by the Raptor in-space relight demonstration about 20 minutes after that. Fast forward another 10 minutes, the ship upper stage will begin the entry sequence, pass through peak heating. It'll be transonic at about T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 5 seconds. Subsonic, about a minute after that. They'll perform its landing flip at T plus 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 4 seconds. And finally, the landing burn starts 2 seconds after that with a splashdown in the Indian Ocean, about T plus 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 26 seconds.
Yeah, so one interesting thing they did mention that they're expecting Pad 39A to come online before the year's over. So that's going to be very interesting. A lot of work required to get that going. I think I feel like they have a lot more to worry about as far as delays go. With Starship, they have launches that they got to compete with, shutting down construction operations for a day or two, once every month and a half right now, probably soon to increase to once every other week. But with the launch cadence at 39A, you get quite the amount of disruptions during launches. So, yeah, I mean, luckily they already have the tower completed down there, so they're pretty much just building the flame trench and new launch mount. So I guess they expect to have all that completed within the next 10 months, or sorry, 9 months.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that impacts the flow of operations at Pad 39A, especially when you get into the latter part of the year and some of the obviously big tests that are going to likely come in preparation for a Starship launch. Thinking about some of the things that are trending toward the back half of the year, or really just throughout 2025. I mean, coming up next, we have the launches of crew missions like NASA's Crew 10 to the International Space Station, the free flying mission of FRAM 2, which is going to be launching to polar orbit, the private astronaut mission from Axiom Space, AX4. Just name a few. Crew 11 coming up later in the year. Got a little actuation from the forward flaps. Great view of one of the aft flaps, I believe this is. And Nathan or Zach, whoever wants to take this, maybe Nathan, you talk about the importance of doing, as the SpaceX commentator Dan Hote notes, the wiggle test of those flaps and some of the actuation that's done on the engines as well pre-launch.
That might be better for Zach to answer that question.
Well, I think a few minutes ago those flaps were stowed, so I think it may just be a normal thing where they, have already performed those flap tests. I think they even do them inside of the Mega Bay, but I believe they were in that stowed position, so they just finally moved them out. But obviously making sure all of your important hardware is working before launch is really good. I think they just try to keep that crosswinds as low as possible by keeping them stowed leading up until the end of propellant loading.
Yeah, I guess the wiggles are a lot like when you have an aircraft. No matter how often you fly it, you have your checklist. You go down and you check all of your elevators and ailerons and so forth to make sure they're working. And I would imagine it's the same kind of a deal as they go through their checklist. Is those wiggles are there, even though they assume they'll work, they go through the wiggles to make sure everything's working correctly and being sensed correctly.
Exactly. Currently T-minus 7 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. We're approaching the conclusion of prop load here. This is just a replay of a booster catch from a previous launch. Just want to note one of the things that was mentioned by SpaceX commentators, that they are still working the issue related to the previously mentioned hold, but they did note that they're confident that it'll be cleared before the T-minus 40-second mark, where they can conduct an actual proper hold. Meanwhile, Kate Tice, the other commentator, said that there is a 35% chance of violating weather constraints. So they're, of course, continuing to keep an eye on the weather, but right now the weather is rated as green. Fortunately, from a visibility perspective, folks, especially that have an elevated view of the launch from South Padre Island, this is pretty much what you're seeing right now, a grayed out view of Starbase, and you might see a ball of light appear and ascend into the sky, but it's not going to be super gorgeous launch viewing today, unfortunately, for those that are to the north of the pad. Those out to the west, though, a little bit better viewing this perspective from cameras at the rocket ranch.
It's not quite as bad as it was during SN15's flight, but kind of gives off those vibes.
Yeah, and of course, with a program that's trying to increase its launch cadence, you're just going to have to deal with weather conditions that are, suboptimal for viewing. But from SpaceX's perspective, obviously, the data from the flight is the most important part of all this. Now T-minus 4 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. We're closing in on the final minutes before liftoff. Our next milestone here coming up at about T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds, just about a minute away from the conclusion of ship prop load. Nathan, Zach, and I have had a chance to talk about this a little bit earlier, but top level, what's your main focus on this mission? What are you mostly watching for with this flight?
Definitely Ship 34's performance in regards to reentry, because they are getting so aggressive, and I understand why. They want to really see how far they can push the ship, and especially in getting ready to possibly catch the next ship. So just seeing how that does, curious, and we may not even get to see how the tiles around the two little catching points, how they do. So that's kind of the area that I'm curious about. It's neat to see the booster catch. I know everybody enjoys that, and I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but it seems like they kind of have that down pretty well. And so really seeing how the ship does.
Yeah, of course, once it gets down to it, they'll make the call in real time on whether or not they're going to try for a third catch of the super heavy booster. Now approaching 3 minutes and counting. At this point, the ship LOX load should be, or ship prop load all the way should be done. You can see on the left-hand side of your screen, it looks like they're about 97 and 98% respectively on liquid methane and liquid oxygen. Now less than 2 minutes to plan liftoff. Just a quick point for those watching right now. You'll note that the countdown clock on the top center of your screen, a little bit ahead of what's coming in through the SpaceX feed. That's because our clock is in real time. What's coming through SpaceX is on a slight delay. So when we get right down to it, we'll make our callouts based off of real-time events as long as we have tracking visibility on the ground here. And then once we're relying on the SpaceX onboard cameras, we'll make our calls based off of the SpaceX timeline of things. Now, 1 minute and counting. What we're watching for is the T-minus 40-minute mark on the SpaceX feed, though, right now. And that'll determine if SpaceX needs to hold here. Less than 40 seconds in real time. SpaceX commentator Dan Hote notes they are going to hold at T-minus 40 seconds. So once they hit that mark, the clock will stop. We will stand by for additional updates on when the clock will start to move. They are still troubleshooting whatever issue they announced may cause a hold at this point. Well, that has come to pass. Just a quick note for those who may be jumping into the live stream either on LabPadre or Spaceflight Now. The reason you're not seeing a launch currently in progress is because the SpaceX team is troubleshooting an issue. Sounds like they do have a solution that'll be put into place, and they should be able to pick up the count here momentarily. Standing by for further. SpaceX commentator Kate Tice noted earlier in the broadcast that they do have the ability to hold for several minutes here at this point at T-minus 40 seconds. So they do have some wiggle room here, unlike a Falcon 9 launch. Again, we are standing by as SpaceX engineers work to clear an issue that came up about 15 plus minutes or so ago, is around the time, I believe, when they first announced that there may be a hold-worthy issue that they didn't go into specificity on, but is caused SpaceX to be in this unplanned hold now for a little more than a minute.
All right, and if you're just tuning in, we are still holding at this T-minus 40-second gate. We cleared an issue on the booster that we were working up until the hold, still working one on ship, and team still continuing to discuss in the background. We can still hold here for several more minutes. If we're not able to resolve the issue or find a workaround, then we would have to essentially scrub and stand down for the day. If that does happen, we can go as early as tomorrow, but that clearly depends on what work we might need to do to fix any issues. So just obviously stay tuned. But right now, we're a little over 5 minutes into this hold today. We've got a couple more minutes that we can hold at T-minus 40 before we have to kick out. Essentially, looking at a lot of those propellant temperatures on both vehicles, you want those to stay in pretty specific ranges for engine startup and things like that. That's what generally drives how long we can hold at T-minus 40. So still hanging out. As soon as we hear an update on the ship, we will let you know. Starting to sound like we might have a decision real soon.
That additional commentary you're hearing is from SpaceX's Dan Hope.
All right, you see the clock rolling. It is time to go for launch. So, 30 seconds to go. Oh. And we just heard a hold. So we kicked. Psych. No. So we did kick out back to the T-minus 40 hold.
It's nowhere near as bad, but this reminds me of the Blue Origin launch or the Blue Origin testing where they constantly had to push back the timer.
Yep, adding 20 minutes and then another 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I don't think SpaceX has
All
either.
right, so as we started counting back down, we did trip a few more holds automatically from the booster itself. So we are now going to hang out here again at T-minus 40. They've got a couple more troubleshooting steps that they can take. If we're able to get through that, we can start counting down again. If not, we could always offload and try again on either tomorrow or another day. But right now we're not done for the day yet. Still holding at T-minus 40 seconds. And as soon as we hear some more or start seeing that clock move, you will know if we're going to go for our launch attempt today or if we just try it again another day. So keep listening in, and we'll have an update shortly. All right, and we did just hear the call. We are going to offload for today. So we had a couple of holds trip as we started counting down from T-minus 40 again. And it's not something we can change with small config tweaks. So we are going to offload our prop and then try again another day. So we're able to fully tank the vehicle. We're unable to lift off today. But just because we don't go today doesn't mean we're not going to go tomorrow or one of the days coming up. So we are going to start offloading all of that propellant on the booster and the ship. As we talked a little bit earlier, we can go as soon as 24 hours later. We won't know that for sure until we dig into everything that kicked us out of our attempt today. So obviously just keep an eye on all of our updates. So we are expecting could be about 24 hours, but we will definitely let people know.
Yeah. So we want to thank everybody for tuning in.
And as you've just been hearing, unfortunately, there will be no launch today. SpaceX has officially scrubbed the launch attempt, first due to previous issue that it sounds like they were able to resolve, but just as soon as that had passed and the count had resumed, there were other issues that were tripped on the Super Heavy booster. Launch attempt is possible, based on what Dan Hewitt said, within 24 hours, but it is unclear if, in fact, they will be able to target that 24-hour turnaround time. It'll be driven by the extent of what's going on with the booster and if there are any other extenuating issues. So, gentlemen, obviously not the path forward that we wanted to see with today's flight, but obviously this has been just another chapter in the iterative process of developing the Starship program. So not entirely unexpected, but of course disappointing for those wanting to see a launch. I will just note before I let you guys jump in here with your thoughts on how today's launch attempt ended, that the weather outlook for the next few days does improve. Tomorrow in the area around Starbase, looking at a high of 76 degrees Fahrenheit, sunny conditions. Wednesday, high of 69, also sunny. Thursday and Friday, looks like we've got that wind picking back up with a high in the low to mid 70s for Thursday and Friday, and then sunny again on next Saturday. So as far as the weather is concerned, should be better for the next couple of days if SpaceX is able to target that 24-hour turnaround. We'll just have to wait and see where the chips fall with this. But before we wind down, just want to get your final thoughts. Nathan, we'll go to you first, and then Zach.
Yeah, it's always sad when there's a hold like this. I think we're a little bit spoiled. Most of these launches of Starship have gone really smoothly, and so we're kind of expecting that. But hey, maybe better views and just a better days ahead.
And Zach?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's good to make sure everything's perfect before launching. You don't want any repeat issues, especially if it's involving the ship. I think it's always kind of been surprising when they don't do a planned wet dress rehearsal. Sometimes I guess by not doing that, a launch can turn into a wet dress rehearsal. So I think the benefit of doing it this way is that, if you do encounter issues, then you can just recycle. But if you're not, if you're doing an intentional wet dress rehearsal and everything turns out pretty much perfectly, then that was almost, essentially a wasted launch attempt. And then you have all of these commodities that you've just expended. The methane is mostly recoverable. The LOX is mostly recoverable. The liquid nitrogen that's involved in the process and everything that's used during the pre-chill sequence is not recoverable. So there is some sort of replenishment that goes on after. Although, other than the liquid nitrogen, I'm not sure if it's really necessary with anything, given that they do have roughly 2.5 launches worth of commodities at that tank farm. So I think one of those things we'll see here as soon as they get to the end of detanking is that we'll see a line of cryo tankers already waiting. They place that order whether they launch or not. So they'll definitely have a minimum amount of cryo tankers coming in to replenish the farm. Luckily, it won't have anything to do with water since they didn't activate the deluge system. So the delays will mostly be just making sure that they've addressed the issue. Hopefully that doesn't involve destacking, but that is a possibility. They may have to actually destack the ship in order to check out the issues or whatever. But we'll be finding out, I guess, in the next 24 hours or so.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just have to stay tuned for further updates. And of course, we'll let you know on our various social medias from both Spaceflight Now and LabPadre when the next launch attempt will be. And we'll be right back here ready to bring you coverage of Starship Flight 8 when that is ready. Want to thank our guests, Nathan Ziegler and Zach Olden, for joining us with comments and commentary for the duration of this launch attempt. Of course, you can find Nathan working with the fine folks at LabPadre. Zach is holding it down over at CSI Starbase right here on YouTube. So be sure to show that YouTube channel some love. Check out his latest episodes that are currently out from their latest 3-part investigation. You can watch those right now on that YouTube channel, CSI Starbase. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I guess we'll either be seeing you tomorrow or the next day.
Yep. Definitely.
And want to thank all of the folks in the live chats for both LabPadre and Spaceflight Now for your patience, your insight, your intrigue, and your support for both channels. Be sure to give these live streams a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribers of Spaceflight Now and LabPadre. Also consider channel membership. It's an ongoing way to support what we do, especially when we're spinning up big launch coverage for missions like this, the aforementioned Blue Origin, New Glenn, and others coming down the road. So certainly appreciate your support in all the work that we do here at both LabPadre as well as Spaceflight Now. I want to thank the folks behind the scenes, to Lucid, to Ezra, to Steven, to Chief, all the members of both teams that make these opportunities possible. Thanks to the folks at the Rocket Ranch for hosting us once again and helping to support our live coverage. We look forward to being back with you the next time that SpaceX is preparing to launch. And a big thanks to Lewis as well. Apologies for leaving him off the list. Obviously, big part of the LabPadre team. With that, we're going to go ahead and close things out for tonight. And again, keep your eyes peeled to our social channels. We'll let you know when SpaceX is ready for its next Starship launch attempt. And we'll be back here with live coverage all the way. So for all of us from LabPadre, from Spaceflight Now, thank you again for your time and attention. And we will see you next time, folks. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we'll see you on the next time. Until then, bye-bye.